Hello, and welcome to Sustainable Outlook, a podcast from global law firm K&L Gates, where we discuss the transactions, technologies, and trends in the sustainable economy. We hope you enjoy this discussion. Please reach out with suggested topics or guests, or questions about how we can work together to create a sustainable economy.
Welcome to this episode of Sustainable Outlook. I'm Molly Barker, your host for today's episode and an attorney in the Environmental and Energy Practice Group at K&L Gates. I'm very excited to be joined today by Janice Lin, founder and CEO of Strategen and founder and president of Green Hydrogen Coalition. Janice holds 2 decades of experience in clean energy, market development, and corporate strategy. Prior to founding Strategen in 2005, Janice held several senior management positions at Powerlight Corporation. In 2009, Janice co-founded the California Energy Storage Alliance, where she successfully served as executive director for 10 years. Since 2019, Janice has founded and served as president of the Green Hydrogen Coalition, an educational nonprofit. As a result of these experiences, Janice has advised a diverse range of clients, including renewable energy, technology, and service providers, developers, large corporations diversifying into the clean energy market, utilities, investment funds, and non-governmental organizations such as the World Bank. Thanks so much for joining us, Janice.
Thanks for having me here.
So to get started, wanted to learn a little bit more about you. I understand that you started at Strategen, a globally connected, impact-driven consulting firm on a mission to decarbonize energy systems back in 2005, and then went on to California Energy Storage Alliance 2009, and ultimately to the Green Hydrogen Coalition in 2019. What led you to start at each of these organizations, and what services did they provide?
Well, I love this question because it deals with why. And I'll just share with you, I had my background started as a strategy consultant, and then I got involved in high tech and venture capital. And I had a moment of clarity in 1999. And that was, I needed to transition my career to being mission driven. And it was a really clear moment. And in that moment, I decided I wanted to focus on a specific industry area that advanced a clean energy transition. I've always loved the environment. And I had another simple goal, which was I'd love to someday be able to give talks about this at conferences. So with that epiphany, I got involved in solar energy, absolutely fell in love with renewable energy. And ever since that epiphany moment, I haven't looked back. Like everything that we do at Strategen, the California Energy Storage Alliance, the Vehicle Grid Integration Council, now the Green Hydrogen Coalition, it's all about accelerating a clean and just energy transition. And waking up and doing the work that we do with purpose makes all the difference. I did want to explain, the relationship a little more if there's time of why I started all these different groups. Because
I would love to hear that. Yeah,
there's sort of a logic to it. And so I shared with you that I had this epiphany and I got out of tech and I went to work for a solar company. I fell in love with renewable energy. And it became clear after some time that and I was in solar and looking at renewable energy and wind, and that for renewable energy to achieve much higher penetrations in the grid, we would need to store these valuable electrons, because the mismatch, when you think about it, like demand and supply, especially when you're talking about intermittent renewables, increasingly over time will become more mismatched, not less.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, so that was the rationale for the California Energy Storage Alliance. And while the grid has always used pumped hydro, there was a whole suite of new technologies, innovations that are possible. And even though we've pumped hydro, the way our grid and our regulations are designed, it doesn't really contemplate the idea of a lot of different storage devices deployed throughout the power sector to balance that supply and demand. And for different types of storage to take their rightful place in electric power sector planning, fundamental legal and regulatory reform was needed. And so in the early days, we were doing consulting work for a lot of different storage companies, and it became clear that that was the innovation that was critically needed so that these innovative solutions could compete for resource adequacy, compete for delivering ancillary services, but the fundamental rules weren't there. And sometimes when the task before you is to change market rules, it's much easier to do so when you can aggregate entities, when you can create a mission-driven movement. And that's what the California Energy Storage Alliance was all about. How do we reform our market rules so that energy storage can compete and become a valuable resource in our power sector? It's hugely successful. CISA has been a key component of driving market reforms in California since the beginning. And many of those policies and regulatory reforms are showing up all over the country and all over the world. Dial the clock forward. As storage was taking off in the grid, it was aided by now a lot of progress in battery electric vehicles. And as battery electric vehicle manufacturing capacity increased, so did the cost of batteries. So it was mutually symbiotic. And we noticed that as consumer demand takes off for battery electric vehicles, we would have a lot of battery capacity literally on wheels all over the place. And most of that battery capacity sits idle. I mean, everyone who owns a car, if you're like me or you, it's parked in the driveway most of the time. So there, the idea was, well, if we have all this battery capacity out there, let's be smart about how we charge these vehicles, potentially in an aggregated way, leveraging these vehicles as a grid resource. And that was the logic behind starting the Vehicle Grid Integration Council. And the VGIC's role is to reveal value from smart charging, from what we call vehicle grid integration. And that particular nonprofit has taken off. It's very well supported by a very broad range of car OEMs, charging companies. And so far it's focused mostly on California, but I think the VGIC has great potential in now that there's a lot of infrastructure being built out for vehicle electrification literally all over the country, and as a model for how we think about battery electric vehicles as a grid resource. Dial the clock a little bit forward. Now we're advocating there's more electric vehicles, there's more storage. And in 2016, we asked this simple question. What kind of storage is the grid going to need when we achieve 100% renewable energy? And it was a reasonable question because renewable energy, namely solar and wind, is now the lowest cost marginal source of energy in the planet, in most countries around the world. And so we did a little study that said, hey, what if, take California, for example, California's demand was entirely satisfied by wind and solar? What kind of storage would we need? And we took the CAISO OASIS data, amped up solar and wind production such that the production exactly equaled demand. And then we plotted the net deficits and the net surpluses over the course of a year and looked at that result. And in about 10 seconds, this was in 2016, I came to the conclusion that we were going to need multi-day, weekly, monthly, and seasonal storage. At the time, CISA's portfolio, the largest type of storage we were representing was pumped hydro. That was not going to be bulk enough. We talk about bulk storage, not bulk enough. So I started looking around and quickly came to the realization that green hydrogen, meaning hydrogen made from renewable sources, stored and then turned back into clean, firm, dispatchable power, could serve this need, because just like natural gas, just like other fossil fuels, you can store hydrogen indefinitely and in very large quantities. In fact, we store it today in 3 salt caverns in the Gulf of Mexico commercially. The only difference is most of the infrastructure we have today for hydrogen, that hydrogen is produced from fossil fuels. So in this use case of using green hydrogen as long duration storage, seasonal storage, providing clean, firm, dispatchable power at very large scale, why not take this little molecule and decarbonize every sector in the economy? As we know, renewable hydrogen can displace gasoline and diesel for all types of vehicles. Renewable hydrogen can be used to produce sustainable aviation fuels. It can be combusted like we combust natural gas for thermal heat applications in industry. There was literally not an application we could find that couldn't use abundant, low-cost green hydrogen to fully decarbonize that sector, even aviation, right? Like Airbus right now is working on airplanes that'll run on hydrogen fuel, and we can use sustainable aviation fuel today, which needs hydrogen to produce sustainable. You need hydrogen to produce sustainable aviation fuel. That epiphany was what stimulated the formation of the Green Hydrogen Coalition, because at that time, there really wasn't any entity that was working on a renewable green hydrogen future that envisioned multi-sectoral decarbonization. And the unique spin that we have on our, not spin, but our point of view is that the way to truly achieve a green hydrogen economy and achieve economy-wide decarbonization is by solving for mass scale, very low cost, delivered green hydrogen. And so we were thrilled when the DOE came out with an RFI for hydrogen hubs. It was actually a year earlier that we had submitted an unsolicited proposal idea suggesting, hey, one way to break through this mass scale chicken and egg problem is through hubs. And we think that the DOE would be in a terrific place to stimulate progress there. So the bipartisan infrastructure law and the DOE's subsequent hydrogen Earthshot is exactly what the doctor ordered to stimulate progress in this area.
Oh, that's very fascinating. Well, I appreciate you giving all that additional background on each of the organizations, because it does give a lot of good color and, as you said, kind of tease up what ultimately ended up happening recently with the DOE funding RFI. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Can appreciate that. So we all know that back in June 2022, the U.S. Department of Energy released a notice of intent to fund the bipartisan infrastructure law's $8 billion program to develop regional clean hydrogen hubs across the U.S. Initial concept papers for the DOE funding were submitted in November 2022, with the understanding that full applications will be due in April 2023. DOE has indicated it will evaluate the applications based on a number of factors that include environmental justice, community engagement, consent-based siting, equity, and workforce development, and will select the proposals that prioritize employment opportunities, outline hydrogen feedstocks and end uses, and geographic diversity. What other factors do you think will be critical to picking the best proposals?
Well, what we know from our work in building scaled green hydrogen hubs is that the key to low delivered cost is scale, massive scale. And the work that the GHC has done has shown that when scaled, and by scale, I mean production in the order of 1 to 1.5 million metric tons per year in targeted locations that can serve a multitude of scalable, very closely located off-takers is really key, because you can afford the infrastructure, the transport and storage infrastructure needed to achieve low delivered cost. So I'd say a short answer to your question is that the scalability of these initial proposals will be key, and scalability with visibility into where the offtake is going to come from. Because we all know that when you have visibility into credible, bankable buyers, everything else in creating the ecosystem becomes much easier.
A question I do have relates to, across the pond, Europe. I am wondering how hydrogen policy in Europe differs from that in the United States, and if you think there's anything the United States could learn from Europe about scaling its technology for commercial grid deployment.
Yeah, it's a great question. And the GHC's roots are in Europe. One of the my co-founding board members of the GHC is Thierry Lepierre. He's an executive, a renewable executive from Europe, and is actively building green hydrogen hubs in Europe right now. He successfully announced the launch of Hydeal España, which is a very large-scaled hub in northern Spain. So your question about how does it differ than the United States? Well, the first thing I noticed is Europe was far ahead, going back to 2016, 2017, 2018. And indeed, the first time I heard about green hydrogen was from a scientist from Fraunhofer in Germany. And so Europe, and with Germany being in the lead, has been promulgating this idea that with abundant, low-cost, renewable hydrogen, you can do that. They call it power to X, right? You can take abundant, low-cost green hydrogen, decarbonize every sector, and even go into fuels. And it is true that the technologies to create any type of fossil fuel product we use today already exists. Hydrogen is the energy carrier, and then you need a source of CO2, biogenic source, ideally, and you can produce any type of liquid fuel. This is technology that was invented during World War II. So Europe has had this vision, I think, in part driven by the need for greater energy security, which has proven to be quite acute. The events of the last year have shown with the war on Ukraine and the extreme shortages of natural gas. So I would say there is an urgency in Europe that is very serious now, and it's accelerating a lot of progress. All the policies that they had in place are being accelerated. The one difference in the United States is our mechanism with the recent passage of the IRA has tipped the scales. And what developers are telling me now is that the U.S. is now one of the most attractive, if not the most attractive market for green hydrogen because of the consistency and ease of implementation of the tax credits that were in the IRA. So it's a known pathway. Investors, developers, they know what they're going to get. As the implementation of that is clarified, that one policy coupled with the DOE's impetus for the hydrogen Earthshot is really stimulating a lot of progress here in a very attractive way commercially. Truly, like developers from all over the country, investors are actively looking at the U.S. now, which is a market difference. When I started in 2016, I tried to get many of those same companies and entities to come here, and they would say, "Oh, we're too busy. We're working on scaled green hydrogen projects in Chile and Australia, and U.S. isn't so interesting." Well, that is
now they're all ears.
Exactly. The U.S. is definitely in business for clean and green hydrogen. I would say if there's one thing that the U.S. could learn from Europe about scaling and how to achieve truly a national, scaled regional hubs and a scaled national clean and green hydrogen vision, that is the importance of shared infrastructure. So since 2016, Europe has been working on the European Hydrogen Backbone Initiative in close collaboration with their gas TSOs, transmission service operators, and they have developed and are accelerating a clear vision for converting their natural gas pipeline system to a green hydrogen system. That was brilliant. It was built on a lot of other work because they realized early on in Europe that, again, and these are consistent with our findings from our analysis here, the decisive factor in achieving low delivered cost is the ability to deliver those hydrogens in shared infrastructure. That exists in the U.S. We have pipelines and hydrogen storage facilities. The infrastructure that we have in the U.S. is managed. It's privately owned. It's industrial infrastructure that moves large quantities of hydrogen as an industrial feedstock. So this is something that we know how to do commercially. What we need to do is accelerate progress for how to expand that infrastructure, convert existing natural gas infrastructure to green hydrogen, because that ability to connect areas of very scalable, very low cost production with areas of concentrated scalable use is the key.
Very interesting. Well, it will be interesting to see if the U.S. ends up learning from Europe from that end. So another question that I do have is that I understand, and you touched on this a little bit, but I understand that retiring energy infrastructure such as power plants and pipelines are being evaluated to reuse in future hydrogen endeavors. And so I'm curious to know what about this infrastructure makes them well equipped for being applied to the hydrogen space, and what aspects of these technologies may require some tweaking before their conversion to hydrogen operations goes live.
Generally, when we talk about our clean energy transition, we're going to need a lot of infrastructure, full point. And the way the clean energy transition will be most successful is if we can also make it affordable, if we can also create jobs and transition literally whole armies of skilled workers into new areas. And the path of least resistance to solving for all of the above is finding ways to repurpose infrastructure. Remember the European Hydrogen Backbone Initiative I mentioned a minute ago? They've actually studied this deeply. Okay. First given is that pipeline transport is the cheapest way to move a lot of hydrogen around, known today. We're not going to be moving hydrogen on trucks and rail cars. I mean, we obviously can do that, but it's just very expensive. We can move electrons around through the electric system and locally produce the hydrogen, but that's still more expensive than moving molecules in a pipeline. So given that, they have studied this deeply and came to the conclusion that the vast majority of the existing natural gas system in Europe can be converted to hydrogen pipelines. Vast majority, I think it's on the order of 80%, like very high percentage. And that repurposing is much cheaper than building greenfield pipes. Now, how to do that repurposing? And I was just talking to Daniel Muthman, who's the chair of the European Hydrogen Backbone Initiative, and he said the areas that need further construction and further work are really the areas where a pipeline crosses a seismically unstable area. That's where you may have to put more of the investment. But generally, their pipeline as is good to go. The other interesting data point is that when you convert it, hydrogen is a smaller, lighter molecule, but it moves more quickly inside the pipeline than natural gas. So they can fit about 80% of the, for same size pipeline, 80% of the energy equivalent if it were converted to 100% hydrogen. These are all very good news takeaways. Now, every pipeline system, I'm not a pipeline engineer, but from a safety and regulatory standpoint, we have to catch up and do our homework and see what we can do over here. So that's why I'm emphasizing the need for really strategic thinking on how to convert our existing pipeline system. I do want to emphasize the workforce because, generally the GHC, we're mission driven, right? Like our goal is to decarbonize every sector. So you mentioned power plants earlier. If there is a fossil fuel power plant that we don't need anymore for a variety of reasons, the first goal should be, can we retire that power plant in a managed and meaningful way? And often those power plants employ a lot of people. So what can you do with that power plant, the land, the interconnection? What if a coal plant, previously it was coal in, electricity out. What if you could take a coal plant and you had electricity and hydrogen out? You have a lot of valuable real estate, a lot of valuable assets there. They're an interconnection. They have water rights. I just share that as one example. And importantly, these facilities have skilled and trained employees that have worked there for generations that can continue to operate. So, other power plants could be converted. Maybe it can be converted from a natural gas turbine to a hydrogen turbine. All the OEMs are saying that even existing turbines can combust a certain percentage. And all of them are saying by date certain they'll have turbines that can run on 100% hydrogen. And even a converted power plant can take advantage of the land, the skilled workforce, existing water rights, and interconnection. So those are all reasons why leveraging existing infrastructure will make our energy transition more affordable and more manageable.
What role do you think hydrogen is going to play in the global energy market down the road?
I believe that hydrogen, clean and green hydrogen, will become one of the world's most traded commodities. Much in the same way that oil and gas is traded today. It'll be foundational. Thierry, my founding board member, says that hey, green hydrogen's the new oil.
I hope that is true. I'm looking forward to that day. Do you have any sense of how green hydrogen will compare in its job creation potential when put up against the incumbent fossil fuel industry?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because we actually did a deep dive on this for Southern California. So our first hub effort that we looked at, again, this is answering the question, can we achieve an architected mass-scale green hydrogen hub? In this case, it was for Los Angeles and Southern California. And we looked at this by starting with aggregated multi-sectoral off-takers, came up with a demand scenario, then started looking around and saying, what is the lowest cost source of hydrogen production to serve this demand? We came up with a vision for 2030. And against that vision, we did an end-to-end system plan, upstream production, midstream transport, downstream delivery, multiple sectors, and looked at the job creation potential. We looked at job creation. We looked at air quality benefits too, which were profound. But the finding was the job creation potential was far exceeded incumbent fossil fuel industry jobs. So that was a very exciting finding, which means that even creating a green hydrogen economy, say for Los Angeles and Southern California, will have a needed additional positive benefit, not only cleaning the air, but also stimulating economic development and creating well-paying jobs for communities that have historically suffered from the effects of the fossil fuel industry.
Well, you have certainly gotten me very excited about our green hydrogen future. So thank you, Janice.
Thank you, Molly. And on that note, please do come join us. Please check us out. We'd love to have additional supporters join our effort. It's a great community.
That sounds great. Do you want to share your website name? Is it Strategen?
I'm talking about the Green Hydrogen Coalition in particular, since that's most of what we were talking about. And it's called the Green Hydrogen Coalition. And the URL is www.ghcoalition.org.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'm sure the listeners appreciated that. So thank you so much, Janice. And thank you to all of you who are listening to this episode of Sustainable Outlook. We hope that you enjoyed this, and we hope that you will join us again soon as we continue to explore the intersection of environmental, social, and economic sustainability. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainable Outlook. To listen to past episodes and receive notices for new episodes, subscribe by searching Hub Talks, that's HUB Talks, in your favorite podcast app. We hope you will tune in next time to learn more about the outlook of the burgeoning sustainable economy.